want to welcome you to virtual worship at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton. This is Sunday, July 12th, and my name is Dick Doughty, and I will be leading this service. We begin by singing "We Give Thanks," hymn number 1010 in the Teal hymnal. I want to welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton. We are an intentionally welcoming congregation, and we invite you to be a part of this community. When we make this statement, we are stating our vision of love and acceptance. We welcome you, your background and beliefs, all racial and ethnic identities, sexual orientation and gender identities, and theological perspectives as well. You are welcome here and accepted. If you have questions about this congregation or about the UU faith, please ask any member. After the service, all are invited to join our virtual coffee hour at 11 a.m. this Sunday. This morning, we light our chalice with words by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in the celebration of the life we share together. Our opening hymn is number 148 in the Gray Hymnal. Let freedom span both east and west.
And
we join together virtually in stating the covenant of this fellowship. At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton, we seek to nurture spiritual and intellectual growth for all ages, and to be actively involved in community outreach and service, cherishing diversity and celebrating our oneness with all humanity. We covenant to support each other in the spirit of compassion, respect, and love. I invite you into a time of reflection and meditation. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke in King Chapel at Cornell College, Mount Vernon, Iowa, on October 15, 1962. In a speech that inspired a generation of Cornellians, he said, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other." Let us now pause for a moment of silence to reflect on these words. At this quiet time during worship, we would seek to know more deeply what it means to love one another. We know that we ourselves need understanding, affection, and recognition. The moment that it takes to listen to someone else is invaluable. And yet so often we fail, even within our own families, to live by the sacred commandment that we should love one another. One way we show our love in this community is by sharing our greatest joys and our deepest sorrow. I will now light one candle to represent all the joys and sorrows received this week. We continue to hold those in our hearts who are suffering from the coronavirus, and we are grateful for the sacrifice of health professionals who have unselfishly given of their time and talent to help others. Barbara and I would like to share a joy. Our oldest granddaughter, Rebecca, who lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, is expecting her first child later this month. This will be our first great-grandchild. Jane shared the following sorrow. The Shore Shakespeare Company community has had another tragic death. Co-founder Avra Sullivan's husband died suddenly to an asthma attack that stopped his heart. Avra has a young son to raise on her own and a terrible loss to bear. On another note, in this time of racial awakening in America, I am very hopeful that some progress may be made toward racial equity for all persons of color. Let us take time and hold what we have heard and that which has not been spoken. For those joys and sorrows that have been shared, and for those that remain in the sanctuary of our hearts, we are grateful. Amen.
Love is but a song we sing, fear's the way we die. You can make the mountains ring, or make the angels cry. Though the bird is on the wing, you may not know why. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Some will come and some will go, we shall surely pass. When the one that left us here returns for us at last, we are but a moment's sunlight fading in the grass. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. If you hear the song I sing, you will understand. You hold the key to love and fear in your trembling hand. Just one key unlocks them both, it's there at your command. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now.
I believe that our attitudes toward race relations are formed primarily by our life experiences. As a white person, when I think back to my childhood, the first time I remember being aware of race was when our family hired a black woman named Augusta to help clean our house in the suburbs of Wilmington, Delaware. My mother explained to me that blacks were people just like us, and that they should be treated with respect and dignity. We were friendly with Augusta and appreciated her services for many years. When I went away to college at Cornell University in 1960, I was living in a mostly white environment, so race was not a big issue for me. As a cooperative student, I worked in downtown Manhattan one semester and had the opportunity to explore the city. One day I visited Harlem, where essentially all people were black, and I experienced for the first time what it is like to be in a minority. I graduated from college and went to work for the DuPont Company in 1966. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to design electrical power systems for DuPont chemical plants around the world and to visit many foreign countries. I worked with foreign engineers of many different races and religions and expanded my horizons. I began to fully appreciate that there are many meaningful religions in the world and that people of all races have something to offer society. In the middle of my career, the DuPont Company began requiring employees to take diversity training. I found the training to be intense and meaningful. My eyes were opened about the feelings that black people and other minorities had about the dominant white race in America. A major change in my racial understanding occurred when my wife's sister married a black man, and I developed a personal relationship with him. He had a college degree, was well-dressed and well-spoken. I was surprised to learn that when he decided to move to a new community, he had to carefully research proposed housing sites to ensure that he and his family would be safe from harm due to racism. He related to me that whenever he got on an elevator with a white woman, he could see the fear on her face. He developed the commendable daily practice of going to a local coffee shop with neighbors in his community to share his black culture with them, hopefully to lead to more understanding between the races. Over the years, he has become one of my best friends. Recently, I have been attending conversations on race sponsored by Talbot County, and have found them to be very rewarding. I also participated in a 2-day seminar, Courageous Conversation Beyond Diversity, at the Talbot County Education Center in January 2020. About half of the attendees were white, and the remainder were a mix of Latino and Black. A majority of the attendees were school teachers. I learned a great deal at this seminar and would recommend it to anyone who is interested in further developing their racial understanding. One of the topics discussed at the seminar was white privilege. I will discuss this topic in more detail for the remainder of this sermon. Dr. Nikki Lisa Cole, a sociologist, defines white privilege as follows. White privilege refers to the collection of benefits that white people receive in a racially structured society in which they are at the top of the racial hierarchy. Made famous by scholar and activist Peggy McIntosh in 1988, the concept includes everything from whiteness being equated with being normal and native to the U.S., to being represented in the media, being trusted, and easily finding makeup products for one's own skin tone. While some might view some of these privileges as trivial, it is important to recognize that no form of privilege comes without its counterpart, oppression. Peggy McIntosh wrote an essay, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, that provides concrete examples of this concept. At the heart of the concept is the assertion that in a racist society, white skin confers on those who live in it an extensive array of unearned privileges not available to people of color. White privilege is for the most part invisible to those who have it and unacknowledged by them. The key point made by Peggy's list of privileges is that they are not typically available to or experienced by people of color in the U.S. In other words, they experience racial oppression and white people benefit from it. Peggy goes on to describe 50 examples of the daily effects of white privilege that people of color typically cannot count on. Here are a few examples on her extensive list. As a white person, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. As a white person, if I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. As a white person, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location would be neutral or pleasant to me. As a white person, I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. As a white person, when I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. As a white person, whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. As a white person, I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. As a white person, I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. As a white person, I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. As a white person, I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race. As a white person, if a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. As a white person, my culture gives me little fear about ignoring the perspectives and powers of people of other races. As a white person, I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having my coworkers on the job suspect that I got it because of my race. As a white person, I can be pretty sure of finding people who would be willing to talk with me and advise me about my next steps professionally. As a white person, I can consider many options, social, political, professional, without asking whether a person of my race would be accepted or allowed to do what I want to do. As a white person, I can choose public accommodation without fearing that people of my race cannot get in or will be mistreated in the places I have chosen. As a white person, I can choose blemish cover or bandages in flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. As a white person, I will feel welcomed and normal in the usual walks of public life, institutional and social. Dr. Cole also made the following observations. Those who believe the U.S. has achieved a colorblind society or that racism is no longer an issue in American society ought to read some of Peggy McIntosh's reflections on race as a white person. And I quote, "White privilege is often invisible and often denied, but there's little doubt that it exists. Reflecting on it explodes the myth of meritocracy and the myth that democratic choice is equally available to all. I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group," she wrote. As a white person, she had been taught about racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage, but had been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, white privilege, which puts me at an advantage. I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Describing white privilege makes one newly accountable. Dr. Cole further states that seeing and understanding white privilege is not about blaming white people for having unearned advantages. Rather, the point of reflecting on one's white privilege is to recognize that the social relations of race and the racial structure of society have created conditions in which one race has been advantaged over others, and that many aspects of everyday life that white people take for granted are not even available to people of color. Dr. Cole also points out that white privilege is changing over time, and that since Peggy generated her list in 1988, there are some additional ways that it manifests itself today. White people have the ability to speak and write from an unchallenged position of authority. For instance, commenters online. White people have more options to hold on to wealth during economic crisis. White people are somewhat protected from experiencing the brunt of negative implications of climate change. Economically vulnerable and politically unstable populations, mostly people of color in the global south, are disproportionately affected. White people are somewhat protected from the lowest wages and the most dangerous labor conditions cultivated by the globalization of production. White people are able to deny that racism exists. White people can believe in and cultivate sympathy from others for reverse racism. White people can be unconcerned with the racial implications of political candidates that one supports. White people can believe you worked hard for and earned everything that you have without receiving any help or advantages. White people can believe that people of color who have achieved success have been given racially motivated advantages. White people have the ability to adopt a victim status rather than engaging in critical self-reflection when accused of racism. White people can believe that people need to get over it or move on when they point out racism. White people have the belief that cultural products and practices that come from communities of color are yours for the taking. At this point, I would like to share some information I learned at the seminar, Courageous Conversation Beyond Diversity. Most whites live, grow, play, learn, love, work, and die primarily in racial segregation. Yet our society does not teach us to see this as a loss. Whites are taught to see themselves as individuals, rather than as part of a racial group. It follows that whites are racially objective and thus can represent the universal human experience, while people of color can only represent their race. We are taught that racism must be intentional and that only bad people commit it. A common white reasoning in cross-racial conflicts is that as long as we are good people and don't intend to perpetuate racism, then our actions don't count as racism. We focus on intentions over impact. In a white-dominant society, challenges to a white worldview are uncommon. The racial status quo is comfortable for us. We haven't had to develop the skills, perspective, or humility that would help us to engage constructively with those who are different. As a result, we have very little tolerance for racial discomfort and may respond poorly. There is a term for this: white fragility. At this point, the key question you are probably asking is, even if I understand white privilege and go out of my way to treat minorities with dignity, respect, and compassion, What should I do as a white person about white privilege? One way to move forward is to engage in courageous conversation about race with others who are racially different. There are 3 suggested steps to do this that were also mentioned at the seminar. The first step is to engage through your own personal racial experiences, beliefs, and perspectives, while demonstrating respectful understanding of specific historical as well as contemporary and local racial contexts. The second step is to sustain yourself and others in the conversation through mindful inquiry into multiple perspectives, beliefs, and experiences that are different than your own. And the third step is to deepen your understanding of whiteness and interrogate your beliefs about your own association with and relationship to racial privilege and power. One way to do this is to participate in the conversations on race that are sponsored monthly by the Talbot Family Network. These meetings have been temporarily suspended due to the coronavirus, but they should resume in the near future. The meetings start with a free meal followed by group discussion on different topics about race and race relations. There is no cost, but advanced registration is required. You might consider joining the UUCR Racial Justice Google group, UUCR-racial-justice@googlegroups.com. This is an active discussion group led by Philip Dutton that discusses current events and shares information relating to race relations and racial justice. The group's latest recommendation is to read the book White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And most important, if you are a white person, you can elect not to take advantage of any unearned privilege that comes your way in the course of your daily life. This is a conscious and courageous step we can all take to make society a more even playing field for all people. In closing, I would like to read some words spoken by President Barack Obama at the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery marches. We do a disservice to the cause of justice by intimating that bias and discrimination are immutable, that racial division is inherent to America. To deny this progress, this hard-won progress, our progress, would be to rob us of our own agency, our own capacity, our responsibility to do what we can to make America better. All of us need to recognize, as they did, that change depends upon our actions, on our attitudes, the things that we teach our children. And if we make such an effort, no matter how hard it may sometimes seem, laws can be passed, and consciences can be stirred, and consensus can be built. May it be so. Our closing hymn is number 323 in the Gray Hymnal, Break Not the Circle.
Oh,
extinguish the chalice, I read closing words by Frederick E. Gillis. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always. The service is concluded at the end of the postlude.